Today's video is a recent podcast interview I did with Dan Garner. Dan is a Canadian-based strength and conditioning coach, educator and performance nutritionist, and he works with elite athletes across a range of sports, including several high-profile UFC fighters. So Dan brings a wealth of experience. He's worked with in excess of 1,000 athletes one-on-one, and through his online programs in excess of 1 million athletes. So today is a really interesting conversation. I hope you get a lot of value from it. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please maybe consider sharing it with a friend or colleague, or sharing this episode across your social medias. It just really helps get the show out to a wider audience and help more people. So let's get Dan Garner on the podcast. Garner on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dan.
Hey, no problem at all, man. Thank you for having me.
So I brought you on the podcast today because I've followed your work for quite a while, and you're obviously a very experienced coach. I think you've said before you've worked in excess of probably 1,000 athletes. But I think to describe you as just a coach would be underselling it a bit. So you do much more than that. So if people were to ask you, who is Dan Garner? What does Dan Garner do? What would you say to that?
Well, I wear a lot of different hats. It's kind of a difficult question to answer sometimes. It makes me think. But I like how you opened it up with me being a coach, because I do very much consider myself a coach first and an educator second. I'm always in the trenches. I'm always working with athletes. I'm not just reading research or collecting data or making claims online. I'm working directly with athletes, getting real results every single day. So I am a coach first. I'm also a functional medicine practitioner. I'm wildly passionate about training and nutrition. Been in this game for a lot of years now. I have worked with over 1,000 athletes in a one-on-one setting, but through my online portals, I've worked with over 1 million athletes. So I feel like I've been able to gain experience in dog years. You know, every 1 year I've been a coach, I've got 7 years experience, because literally hundreds of thousands of people are throwing data back in my direction, which is a great pool to work from. So I work 100% online now, but I started as a normal personal trainer on the floor of a Gold's Gym here in London, Ontario, Canada, and not London, England. And that's where I started off. But at this point in time, I've worked my way up the ladder, so to speak, and I've got a year-round stable of athletes in the NFL, the NHL, the UFC, the MLB. I've worked with plenty of celebrities now as well. So I've had 3 Super Bowl champion winners, a UFC title holder, an Olympic gold medalist, multiple world record holders. I've got people ready even for things like Netflix comedy specials. So if you can think of any random weird niche, I've somehow found my way there.
That's fantastic. And obviously, I think that wealth of experience, along with being so scientific and evidence-based in your approach, allows you to straddle both sides. As you said, yes, you're very evidence-based into the research, the science side of things, but straddling as a coach first allows you to really put context on everything you do. And where you seem to use the science, and one of the niches that you do a lot of laboratory-based testing with your athletes and kind of an initial needs analysis. So I suppose when an athlete first comes to you and you're assessing a high-level athlete, what's the rationale behind using the laboratory-based testing? Why do you think that's an essential tool in your coaching toolbox?
I think it's an essential tool to get someone to a truly elite level. And I really like how you kind of separated science and experience there for a moment, because I really think that people make a lot of the same mistake over and over again when they look at researchers as if they're coaches, or they'll look at coaches as if they're researchers. These are 2 different disciplines, and yet sometimes our own ego can kind of make us make large claims. And it's like, well, hold on a second. Is that in your scope of practice? Do you have the experience to say that kind of thing? How much studies have you actually read? How much studies have you actually conducted? And how many athletes have you actually trained? So there's 2 different worlds, and we need them both. None is less qualified than the other, because we need researchers to keep the industry advancing, but we need coaches to keep it relevant to real life scenarios. And that's kind of the huge break. And when you marry those two, that is when you get real results. And that's essentially how I'm going to answer your question on my lab-based nutrition. Because when someone hires me and they're an elite client, I am very comprehensive in my undergoing as to how I am going to design their nutritional program perfectly and truly customized for them. So since I am a functional medicine practitioner, I eliminate the physician's appointment entirely. I mail the labs directly to my elite clientele. So they will receive a blood, urine, saliva, and stool analysis on their doorstep. They will fulfill those kits. Those kits will be sent to the lab, and the lab will process the results and send them over to me. Once I have that data, I'm looking at things like inflammation status, vitamin and mineral status, hormone balance, the urinary metabolites, organic acid testing. I'm looking at even things like cholesterol and triglycerides, because that's relevant for creating an optimally healthy athlete, which is required for optimal performance. So I'm looking at all of these lab results because that's as objective as it gets. That is the blueprint of your physiology from the inside out, period. But then I marry that with a series of lifestyle assessment questionnaires, because no matter how many labs I do, I'm never going to know your body better than you do. And I'm never going to know your psychology and emotional maturity and emotional connection towards training, nutrition, and your goals. I'm never going to know that better than yourself. So I can't just look objectively. I need to look subjectively as well. So I very much view the labs as the science of nutritional coaching and the lifestyle questionnaires as the art of nutritional coaching. And then when we can marry the science and the art, that's when we truly can get that combination of researcher plus coach, which is really what allows people to get 10 out of 10 results.
And I really like there what you're saying about not just looking at the data, but putting context on that data, because I'm paraphrasing here, but I don't know whose quote was that the purpose of data collection is to turn that data into information and that information into insight. And as you said, if you just look at the objective lab-based test without actually talking to the athletes, you fail to put the context onto that. So I think, as you said, that's a nice way of blending the coaching aspect. Now, one thing I will say there, Dan, is when you use the term, I know on this side of the water, functional medicine, red flags start to go up with some people, because there's a lot of people use that term kind of to pave over some dodgy practices to do, or some woo-woo practices. So within the sphere of lab-based tests, did you see all the ones you talked about are valid and reliable for your cohort? What do you see the trends out there that some athletes are getting tested that really are just kind of fluffy things that coaches are doing? So what do you see are the tests that really people should be watching out for and not conducting?
Yeah, I mean, on my side of the pond as well, people are kind of like, hey, functional medicine, what does that mean? Does that mean it's medicine that doesn't work, right? Yeah. That's normally what it is. And they have a right to say that, because there's a lot of quacks that have kind of wrecked the reputation of using a more natural type of approach to improving one's lifestyle in order to get a desired health result out of somebody. There's a lot of quacks who have utilized marketing as opposed to science in order to push their business and push their reputation forward, and it's hurt that kind of the industry. But when you have people who still maintain an evidence-based practice, when you have people who maintain their critical mindset, it's invaluable knowledge to understand. And just like there's terrible functional medicine practitioners, there's also terrible personal trainers. There's terrible strength and conditioning coaches. There's terrible doctors. There's terrible lawyers. There's terrible a lot of people. So painting everyone with the same brush is a little bit unfair. I'm a big fan of utilizing the owl philosophy. The owl philosophy, what does an owl do? Well, when they see a rodent, they eat the entire thing. They eat all the meat, all the bones, all the hair, everything. But they spit out what is not good. So they're just keeping the meat, they're just keeping the organs, they spit out the fur and the bones. So take everything in, take in Western medicine, take in Eastern medicine, take in coaching experience, take in crap that you saw on social media, take in podcasts, take in everything and just spit out what's crap. So that's kind of how I approach this. I'm too passionate about training and nutrition not to look at everything. I want to look at everything, because when my clients hire me, it can be the difference between a world title or not, a world record or not, $10 million or not. Yeah, I just had a hockey athlete last year get a contract for $25 million. That's a lot of pressure on myself. So I can't remain dogmatic. The only thing I want to be dogmatic about is getting results for my clients, which means I want to look everywhere and be the owl that consumes everything. Now, the lab testing world, what I think about the lab testing world is it's very beneficial, but I think that people need to stay within their scope of practice, because it's like looking at a different language. Like I know nothing about music. I'm the worst musician in the world. So when I look at a sheet of music, it means the notes don't mean anything to me. And what I see right now is lab-based nutrition's gaining in popularity. It's kind of the next thing. And it's gaining a lot of popularity. So people want to get on it before they understand it. And that's a dangerous game. You don't want to get caught in that. You want to understand it fully from the inside out. You want to be able to truly be able to interpret the results and then use those results with the subjective measures as well to get good results with your clients. So I think that's one thing that's a little bit sketchy about the lab-based nutrition world, is people doing it before they're ready. I think another thing that's sketchy about the lab-based nutrition world is gene typing. I think that genetics research is potentially the future, but it's not the present. Yeah. And what some people will say is like, well, genetics, that's what's going to tell you everything about yourself. It's your genetics, right? Okay, well, hold on. Wasn't it your urine that went into the vial? Wasn't it your blood? Wasn't it your stool? Wasn't it your saliva? How does that not represent your current state of physiology with more repeated and valid and reliable measures that we have in the data relevant to your demographic? That's what's more important. So I think that people being out of their scope of practice and genetic testing kind of as a whole is two things that I see a little bit wrong with lab-based nutrition, but shouldn't offer people the idea to paint lab-based nutrition with a brush saying it's not ready, because it is when you use the right tests.
That's fantastic. And I really like that owl analogy, what you said of being open to take everything in and then just reject what is bullshit, essentially. Because within the evidence-based sphere, I think it's too easy that everyone is pushing that they want to be critically minded and critically appraise everything. But I think it's very easy to just fall into the trap of cynicism too much, and people become too cynical to, I know I personally have fallen into that trap in the past, and not open to new ideas. That I think Andy Galpin is a great guy. He constantly harps on about the absence of evidence is not evidence absence. So as you said, be open to new ideas, but just critically appraise them.
Yeah, that dude's brilliant.
So one of the things you said just a little while ago, Dan, was that one of the factors that you use the laboratory testing for is to optimize health of the athlete, because optimal health is required for optimal performance. And I think that sometimes the health aspect gets kind of neglected within elite sport, because, and I've heard of several practitioners say that we're not really interested in the health of the athlete, we're just interested in the performance. But for you, health is paramount to performance, and maybe you'd like to expand on why you believe that to be so.
All right. The athlete will adapt to the training stimulus to the degree of the health that they're currently in, period. The athlete will adapt to the training stimulus to the degree of the health that they're currently in. We utilize our immune system for both the inflammatory response created from a training stimulus, but also the adaptive response of having things like cytokines and different messengers tell the body, hey, we need more amino acids over here. Hey, I need you to repair these muscle fibers and get rid of these dead cells that were damaged through muscle soreness. All of these things, that's immune system. And that plays such a big role in stimulus and adaptation. And one thing I've found is that the healthier an athlete is, the better they adapt to training, because the immune system has nothing else to focus on. You don't have a yeast infection. You don't have a parasite infection. You don't have a bacterial infection. You don't have leaky gut problems. You don't have hormonal imbalances. Like the health of the physiology from the inside out is important. And I think we need to balance both of those. I want to use my outside in measures of the theory and application of setting the appropriate amount of calories, setting the appropriate amount of macronutrients, setting the appropriate meal frequency and peri-workout nutrition strategy. Those are all outside-in measures that we can get great insight from utilizing the data and applying it to the context of the client in front of us. But then the inside-out measures, such as their sleep, their stress, their inflammation, their gut health, all of these things are so important. And it was like the biggest aha moment for me. It was like back in 2015 when I figured that out. You know, if an athlete is plateaued, what does their health look like? Because when you improve the health of the organism, its adaptive capability is dramatically enhanced. And it can be simpler than people think, because before you treat anybody like a pro athlete, before you treat anybody like a celebrity, treat them like a human. Yeah. What do humans need? Humans need to reduce their stress. Humans probably need to improve their diet. Humans probably need to sleep a little bit more, right? There are things that we can do population-wide that create your quote-unquote elite result. And it only because it focuses on health. So when someone comes to me, I'm not like, okay, daily undulating periodization, intensity scheme, we're going to use the Norwegian frequency project and then increase the, there's a lot of things that you can get crazy with. Let's do that after we make sure this person's healthy so that they have the physiology to respond accordingly to the stimulus we're going to try to provide.
100%. And I think that even as a nice narrative makes sense, that if we are saying, and we can all agree that any given person has a maximum adaptive capacity that they can reach, and we want to dedicate the majority, if not all of that adaptive capacity to training adaptations. But as you said, if there are some infections going on that are taken away from the body's upper limit of capacity, and which they inevitably will, because the body has to fight to repair certain information or certain areas, that will take away. And as you said, it might be even marginally, but at the top level you are fighting for these marginal gains. So with the amount of data you've collected from you said near 1 million or over 1 million athletes at this stage, what are the big pillars that people are falling down on? What are the things that you see yourself again and again just changing with the athlete to improve their health status?
Well, from a health perspective, I would say sleep is one of the biggest ones. I would definitely say stress is another big one. And I would definitely say gut health is another big one. Those three are massive. That's from a health perspective. But from a performance perspective, lots of times I just see program pinballing. They go from a program on bodybuilding.com to a program that a coach gave them 5 years ago to a program they found on T Nation to a program from someone else. There's no logical periodization in place. And periodization beats program hopping every single day and twice on Sundays. So periodization is huge. So I would say stress, sleep, and gut health are some of the things I find myself working on the most with clientele, to improve their health, to improve their adaptive capacity. But then when someone comes to me, almost always, I'm like, okay, what should we be doing? If you ask them, hey, where are you going to be at 5 months from now in terms of training goal, training phase, purpose of training, they've got no idea. And you should have an idea of where you're going, because coaching is reverse engineering. If I take a hockey athlete on typically hockey athletes off season, will start anywhere March, April, June, and then they'll have until September to become a better athlete. But hockey is mixed energy system demand. So they've got to be explosive. They got to be conditioned. They have to be strong. They have to be able to shoot hard. They have to be able to do so many things. So I say, okay, I've got someone in front of me who needs 5 different physical characteristic qualities 5 months from now. I'm going to reverse engineer the program from that day to now and periodize it appropriately so they have all those qualities all the way along. So I would say those are some of the biggest things I see from a performance and health perspective.
And with your periodized plan, Dan, how rigid are you? Because a lot of times I see coaches fall into the trap, in my opinion, of going too extreme with their long-term planning, that to say, okay, 4 months down the line, they're going to need to work on rate of force development for these 2 sessions, and they're planning down to the microcycle level and individual session. So that's great to have a general idea where you're going, but what monitoring systems do you have in place, or what feedback do you look from the athlete, and how flexible are you with your approach? That if it comes to a stage that, you know, it's going to be a power week, but you're like, their power is fine, maybe they need to work a bit on strength or something else. How flexible are you with your approach?
Very flexible. I'm as flexible as needed. Any coach who tries to maintain the same system, regardless of anything else, is a coach who is going to get their client 70% results, I would say. Like, it just as a random number, I would say the client's still going to get results, but it's not going to be as beneficial. And I think this is just as true in life. Like, if you have periodization and you are closed-minded to everything for the next 5 months, well, you're going to miss all the opportunities that were over here that you could have otherwise capitalized on to improve endurance, strength, power, health, your current psychological and emotional state towards your vigor for training, all of these things. And, you know, that's the same in life too. It's like one of the big reasons I'm not a fan of 5-year goals or 10-year goals. I don't know who the hell Dan Garner is going to be in 10 years. So if I have a 10-year goal, well, then I might miss out on projects and opportunities that were with me all along the way because I was focused on my one thing. And 10 years from now, the industry is going to be different anyways. So why am I creating a goal 10 years in advance? Everything's going to change. So just like the industry will be different from a business perspective in goal setting, and we don't want to be trapped, the physiology that you're working with is going to be different by the end as well. So I'm kind of a fan of what I would call a systemless system. You want to have a system that provides guidelines in place, but you need to be the tree that bends with the wind with the context of your client. If they are stressed out, if they did pick up a parasite because they went skiing in India, if they're overtrained right now, they're not eating appropriately. There's a lot of things where you gotta back off, and you gotta be that coach who can see that. Because one thing I can tell the listeners of your podcast is, the coach who is the most adaptable is the one who gets the best results, period. When you have the ability to confidently adapt to the context that's in front of you, that's when you're going to get the best results. And we even kind of saw that in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning. It was pretty cool. Young, healthy, resistance trained males in American football were. And that strength training system, one group followed an exact periodized strategy, and the other group was to perform the same amount of training volume, but do the workouts when they wanted to. So essentially when they felt best. And at the end of that study, the group who did the workouts when they wanted to got both bigger and stronger, even though the same training volume was performed. Why? Psychological state, emotional state, recovery. These things are subjective in a lot of ways. So we have to be flexible. So I have my athletes fill out something I call the weekly Sunday update. And it's super simple. It's not time intensive, but it goes over things like energy. How is your energy this week? Has your body composition changed? What's your current weight? How did you sleep this week? Is there anything I can help you with? It depends. I've got a lot of different updates that I use for fighters, football, hockey. Somebody's getting ready for a movie. It's going to be different. Yeah. But it's every single week, my athletes report back to me, or my clients report back to me with subjective measures, and I adapt accordingly.
And obviously, in order to do this, you have to have honesty on the part of the client, and they have to feel comfortable enough to open up to you. So what do you think are the key components to developing a really good and productive coach-athlete relationship?
Well, honesty is a funny thing in my scenario, because if you were going to fight Anderson Silva in 8 weeks, would you do what I said, or would you slack off?
Yeah, I do what you say.
Yeah, you're gonna get in the cage and someone wants to kill you. So it's a bit of a different scenario with me, because sometimes guys are fighting in a steel cage, literally speaking, or there's millions of dollars on the line, or it's their last shot to get a contract in the NFL. Lots of times honesty is almost already in place because of my reputation and because of what's on the line. They'll just do anything. But in terms of a little bit of a different context to provide more value for the listeners, I think 2 big things are important for getting honesty, trust, and a coaching relationship out of the deal, as opposed to a coaching dictatorship. during the process. And the first thing that I would say coaches need to do is to not jargonize things. Lots of times, like my podcast, people have enjoyed the podcast that I've been on and enjoy my personal podcast, not just because we talk about science and experience and stuff, but because I say it in a way that makes sense. I say it in a way that's understandable, right? You could say that you are releasing free fatty acids from the triglycerides to undergo beta oxidation to support ATP production. Or we could say you're burning body fat. Yeah. It's just saying, I'm so big on communicating to be effective rather than communicating to try and sound intelligent. So when you could communicate to be effective and use the same terminology that your athlete's using, your athlete might say something like they want to get more toned. Well, we know that's not really true. We need to increase lean muscle mass, decrease body fat. I'll say, hey, no problem. One toning program coming right up. Right. Because they get it. And that not only now are we speaking on the level playing field with one another, but I'm going to get more belief and buy-in out of them at that point, too, because we're having a conversation and I'm not talking at them. So that's the first thing I would say. Communicate to be effective and not communicate to be intelligent. The second thing that I would say, and I'm glad that I finished that rant with I'm not talking at them, because the second thing is shut up. Lots of times we need to listen. We're coaches. You're never going to gain perfect context of the situation if you're the one who's always talking. You should be asking questions. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use your 2 ears and listen to the person in front of you, because lots of times they already know what's wrong. If you ask certain questions like, hey, what do you think would move the needle forward right now? Well, I'm not sleeping too well lately. It's like, boom, I got you, like done. Like that. Lots of times they'll be able to tell you what's going on. I'm eating too much on the weekends. My new gym sucks. They don't have this piece of equipment. There's a guy on the team who's been bullying me for the last couple months, so I don't even want to go to practice. These things are all relevant, but we never, ever, ever know about them unless we shut up. So we've got to be quiet and listen twice as much as we talk and direct. So so that's the marriage right there. Listen, take time to listen and don't just wait to speak. And then when you do speak, communicate to be effective and not to try and sound intelligent.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think it was Michael Golden I heard say, like, you should think scientist but talk client. And that's the best way of going about it.
That's a beautiful quote.
Yeah, it's not mine. I think it's Michael Golden over at Integra. But I think it is. And as you said, not to sound intelligent. And I think a lot of us, when maybe your younger coaches, can fall into that trap of wanting to speak and show off what we know and be more ego driven. And as we become experienced, we realize that that's futile. And obviously you've worked extensively one-to-one. It's much easier to gauge people, read their body language when working one-to-one. But as you communicate online, is there anything that you do that you think allows you to be a really good communicator online with your clients? Do you use video check-ins? Do you use email? Or what way do you try to communicate and improve communication remotely with your athletes?
With my athletes, I use the communication medium that they want to use. So if they want to email, that's cool. If they want a video, that's cool. If they want a phone call, that's cool. I'll communicate with them on the medium they want to be communicated at. So that's something that already builds the relationship a little bit better. I do very often send a video when I send a new training phase or a new nutrition program. I'll send a long video explaining not just the how, but the why behind it as well with them. And they really understand the whole process. And since it's a video, they can rewatch it if they need to learn again. Like, for example, I just recently made a meal plan for one of my clients, a UFC fighter, Sean O'Malley. And I attached like a 25-minute video to it, just walking him through, why is this pre-workout? Why is this post-workout? Why is this one before bed? Why are there more fats here? Right there, I walk him through all of that stuff. So that helps the relationship a lot. I also just think experience is just something you can't put a price tag on when it comes to working online, because I've got intuition now. Most coaches have coaches' intuition. Like, you ever had that feeling where you don't even have evidence, but the client's really not following the program appropriately? Like, how the hell do we know that? Sometimes we just know, and there's coaching intuition. So I would say communicate to the client on the medium they want to be communicated to. Sending videos is a great way to get more face time with them and to build belief and buy-in and explain the why behind your systems. But then also just get experience. Work with a ton of people. Don't just read textbooks. Work with a ton of people and you'll build the intuition to know what's going on.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And that brings us into the next thing that I want to talk about, Dan. And you said there about working with UFC fighters. So obviously, one thing you're becoming increasingly known for is working with combat athletes, and in particular working on weight cut strategies within combat sports. And it's an area of quite an interest myself in, and it's an area that I think even at the highest level a lot of guys and gals still get very wrong. So what are the biggest mistakes you see with athletes when it comes to weight cuts?
Oh, there are so many. That's my job. I'm like, Jesus. I was invited to the UFC Performance Institute to do a nutrition lecture, and my lecture, I called it Modernizing Fight Camp Nutrition, because like my goal was like, it's time to move this industry forward. Like, there's a lot of, just like some of the old school bodybuilding strategies turned out to be great, but a lot of them turned out not to be. They weren't founded on, and they're not practical, and they can be damaging even. And in the fight world, that's more true, because you've got a lot of old school ideologies in both training and nutrition in the fight world. And the big problem is the athletes are tough enough to deal with the damage. They will push through regardless. If you've got a fight, it's an already tough person doing tough training and is about to get in a tough competition. So they'll put their body and their mind through the ringer. And when it comes to the weight cuts, you've got athletes who don't even eat. You've got athletes who will take insane amounts of diuretics and be knocking on death's door. You've got athletes who just aren't that intelligent when it comes to getting body fat off first before they try to get weight off. There's a difference between fat and weight. And sometimes, an athlete will start a weight cut, a male athlete starts a weight cut at like 20% body fat. Like, what are you doing? You should have already lost multiple kilos of body fat by this time, and perhaps even gained muscle, because muscle is 75% water, whereas fat is less than 10% water. So even when it comes to the weight cut, if you're lean and muscular, I can actually strip more weight off you than if you are fat and pudgy. So you need to get lean first. I don't want you to starve yourself. You don't need to drop carbohydrates. The whole fight camp, carbs don't make you fat. Calories do. A lot of fighters will say things like, well, if you overeat carbohydrates, don't they get stored as fat? Okay, well, what do you think happens when you overeat fat? The key word is overeat. It's not carbohydrates. So diuretics, laxatives, starving yourself, thinking that carbs make you fat, even though carbs are fueling the energy systems responsible for you being successful on a fight day and in fight camp. Those are probably the biggest, most common things that I see.
Yeah, and as you said, a lot of it is old school mentality, because I think Reed Real has done a lot of great research, who's now over at the UFC Performance Institute, and what one of his studies showed is that I think half of all fighters always use active sweating methods, so rubber plastic suits, but a quarter only said that they always use low fiber, low residue diet. So you have the guys using the extreme methods when the low hanging fruit, they're not capitalizing on that. So it's something that, as you said, you're trying to modernize that. And I suppose one of the things that we see shocking in combat sports is actually the degree of weight loss, the actual relative body weight that people are dropping in such a short space of time. So in your opinion, on average, and there'll be differences there between individuals, what is the degree of rapid weight loss you're looking for? What, in say the fight week, what percentage of body weight are you happy for an athlete to drop, or are you aiming for an athlete to drop?
You're kind of after two indicators. 8 weeks out, I like them 10% above their weight class. So if you're fighting at 185, like Michael Bisping was, who's my client, me and him won the world title together. If you're fighting at 185, well, then 8 weeks out, I want him at 203.5. I want you 10% above your weight class, 8 weeks out. And then fight week, I want you around 3% over your weight class. If you can do that, we're going to crush this weight cut. It's going to be a piece of cake. So those are the indicators that you want. Those are the indicators of safer weight cuts and realistic rehydration and refueling strategies. And it would just ensure that the athlete actually got leaner throughout the process as well, and didn't just focus on weight loss, and is instead getting as much fat loss out of the game as possible. So I would say follow those two indicators. If you can follow those two, you're doing great.
That's fantastic. And have you faced much pushback in terms of dealing with, say, their head coach and that kind of thing, when you come in with a new athlete who maybe used to dropping that 10% in the 7 days before the fight? How do you deal with coaches who are maybe a bit more old school and think that the more weight you can drop, the more competitive you're going to be?
Yeah, I just say just watch at this point in time, because I know what I'm doing, and I'm confident enough to say that to coaches, because why'd you call me in the first place? What's happening is not working the way it should, and they're not performing the way they should. And lots of times it's actually the fighter who will contact me and not the coach, because the coach thinks the fighter should keep doing the dumb thing. But then the fighter knows good and well, man, I felt so fast, and I felt powerful, and I felt conditioned, and I felt neurally on point, like I was in the zone during fight camp. What the hell happened after that weight cut? Well, you didn't replenish your body with electrolytes. You didn't replenish your body with glycogen. You didn't rehydrate properly. You cut way too much. You also cut too fast. You got diarrhea throughout the process because you tried to rehydrate too soon. And then you used laxatives before that as well, which ruined your electrolyte status. And we need them for proper muscular contraction and relaxation, which are important during a fight. There's a lot of pushback happening, but I always just say, just be patient, watch and see, and whenever necessary, explain the science to them. Take the time. Don't just be an arrogant coach and say like, do as I say, or just follow the program. Trust me, bro. You don't really want to do that. You wanna talk out of both sides of your mouth, kind of, because you want them to just trust you, but at the same time, open all pathways of communication to explain why. And you should be able to explain why. If you're copying someone else's program and you don't know why they're doing what they're doing, that it is actually dangerous for the athlete, and the head coach might be right about the prescription that you're following. But if you open communication pathways to explain the why, and then let them know that they can trust you, this is the most recent stuff, and then perhaps even point out some of the pitfalls as to why the previous way was suboptimal for performance, then there shouldn't be much pushback at all anymore at that point in time.
It's a fantastic answer, and I think coaches can definitely take value from that. And one thing that I hear never talked about is gender difference in weight cut. Do you have a different approach with female combat athletes as opposed to male combat athletes?
Not really. Honestly, things like calories and macronutrients and meal frequency and electrolyte status and hydration, these are very gender non-specific things, and those are the big rocks that you need in place in order to have the process be successful. You could say a couple of things, but they are kind of like a little bit minutiae. First and foremost, we've seen in research before that just feeling dietary restraint can cause menstrual cycle disruptions in athletes. So not actual caloric deprivation, just feelings of dietary restraint can cause menstrual cycle issues. That's important to care about, because if we don't have a menstrual cycle anymore, then we don't have estrogen. And if we don't have estrogen, then we don't have bone density. And if I'm going into a cage fight against Chris Cyborg or Ronda Rousey or Holly Holm, I want as much bone density as I can freaking get. So that's one thing that's important, is remove dietary restraint, which is why we have the subjective measures to make the meal plan fit the athlete and not make the athlete fit the meal plan. I think that that's one thing you could definitely point out when it comes to female combat sports athletes. Another thing you could point out is, again, with the menstrual cycle, in terms of predictable states of water retention. We know 7 days before the first day of bleeding is their highest water retention day of the month. Now, if they fight during that time and they still have their menstrual cycle by that time, that can be a problem. But one way to alleviate that issue is to add more potassium during those 7 days, because that really helps the body decrease the overall water retention surrounding what's going on with female physiology internally at that point. And I think one more thing I could add, but it's relevant to both males and females, is inflammation by itself causes water retention. When you create muscle damage or you have delayed onset muscle soreness, that causes water retention by itself. So in the fight week, the week before the fight, no more hard training sessions. What are you doing squatting? What are you doing doing eccentrics? What are you doing these crazy circuits? Because you're creating a ton of inflammation to try and lose weight, but the inflammation is retaining water on you. So you got the cart before the horse. We're focusing on the wrong thing here. So I would say those three are all relevant, and the inflammation thing is just especially relevant if the female is within the 7 day period before the expected first day of bleeding.
Okay, that's fantastic. And again, it's just something that I don't hear people talking about. So I wanted to get that out there for coaches. So I know you're short on time, Dan, so I'm going to start wrapping it up now. And before I ask you the final question, if people are looking to follow your work or get in contact with you, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, this was really fun, dude. If people want to follow me, I post a lot of training and nutrition and lifestyle stuff on Instagram at Dan Garner Nutrition. I also have my own podcast called The Garner Report, where I basically just turn on a microphone and yell at people for 20 to 40 minutes at a time, because I create those episodes, but I'm pretty passionate about what I'm talking about when I do them. So The Garner Report's my podcast. On Instagram, I'm at Dan Garner Nutrition.
That's fantastic. So that brings us to the final question. And again, this doesn't have to do with anything that we spoke about already today. And that is, what would you say is the biggest mistake you've made, or the biggest learning experience you've had to shape the way you approach either your career or your life as a whole?
Getting out of my own shell, I think, is probably something that had a big impact on my career. If anybody's trying to make it online, listen to me right now. If you don't stand for something, then no one can stand with you. So the evidence-based industry is great, but it's rendered a lot of people to have so many disclaimers and caveats surrounding their statements that they end up talking a lot and saying nothing. You know, I've listened to podcasts like that before. There's such a thing. I call it academic talk. And it's just like two guys talking back and forth about high-level physiology, but having so many caveats and disclaimers that none of the information was applicable. And since you're on both sides of the fence constantly, no one can stand on the side of the fence that you're on. So if you want to build an online business, if you want to build a reputation, if you want people to contact you for to get them results for your services, then stand for something. Because if you don't stand for something, no one can stand with you. And it was a mistake for me, because I was afraid 5-6 years ago or so. I've got my Facebook page, and I would post nutrition and training tips, and I was afraid I was going to get, like, quote unquote exposed, or quote unquote someone, you know, I'd get found out. Someone would post studies or share my status and say, look how wrong this idiot is. These studies say exact opposite to what he's saying. I was scared of that. So my posts sucked because of it. I talked a lot. I didn't say anything. And they were also the most boring posts on the planet. But the moment I was like, you know what? I know what the hell I'm talking about, and I've got experience. I'm going to start putting my thoughts and ideas out there. That's when my career changed a lot. So my mistake was not doing that sooner.
Fantastic. And I think that is something that will really resonate with a lot of the listeners and people that are within the industry. So I hope they can take value from that. So it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you tonight, Dan. Thanks so much for giving up your time and coming on the podcast.
You're very welcome, man. Thank you very much for having me. I'll take any opportunity I can get to talk shop.
No problem at all.